The cursor blinked over the comment button as I stared at the photos of the most extravagant wedding I had seen in years. Robert, my ex-husband of 20 years, was glowing in his designer tuxedo next to Charlotte, my ex-best friend of 30 years, who wore a wedding dress that cost more than the average person's car. The Facebook post had a caption that turned my stomach. I finally found true love. Thank you, life, for giving me the opportunity to start over with the perfect woman. Without hesitation, I typed my comment with the biggest smile I had worn in 2 years. You forgot one thing. 5 minutes later, Robert replied, "What are you talking about, Victoria?" And then I let out the most satisfying laugh of my life, because I knew something he had forgotten. Every single dollar he had spent on that dream wedding came from the multi-million-dollar lawsuit I had won against him 6 months prior. The photo had over 200 likes and was the social event of the year in our city. Robert Miller, the successful 60-year-old entrepreneur, marrying Charlotte Davis, a 58-year-old interior designer, in a ceremony that had taken place at the most exclusive resort in Miami Beach. The comments kept pouring in. What a beautiful couple. Robert finally found happiness. Charlotte, you look radiant. But none of those commenters knew what I knew. Charlotte had been my maid of honor when I married Robert in 1998. She had been the godmother to my 2 children. She had spent every Thanksgiving and Christmas at our house for 2 decades. She had cried with me when I lost my mother, and she had celebrated every wedding anniversary with me. She was more than my best friend. She was the sister I never had. Robert had been my first and only true love, or so I had believed for 20 years. We had met in college when he was studying business administration and I was studying accounting. He was charismatic, ambitious, and intelligent. Together, we had built a business empire. He managed the sales and strategy. I managed the finances and accounting. For 2 decades, we were the perfect team, both in business and in marriage. Until I discovered they had been having an affair for 5 years. 5 years during which Charlotte continued to be my confidant. She kept coming over for Sunday dinner. She kept acting like the most loyal friend in the world while sleeping with my husband every time I left town for work. The divorce had been brutal. Robert had tried to keep everything. The companies we had built together, the house we had designed together, even the savings accounts I had meticulously managed for 20 years. He had hired the best lawyers in the city and had fought a legal war that lasted 18 months. But Robert had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated the woman who had managed his financial books for 2 decades. I knew every transaction, every hidden account, every financial maneuver he had made during our marriage. And more importantly, I knew about every one of his illegal activities. The lawsuit hadn't just been for divorce. It had been for tax fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. Robert had been hiding income for years. He had been moving money to offshore accounts. He had been reporting false losses to avoid paying taxes. And I had evidence of everything. The verdict had been devastating for Robert. Not only had he lost half of our legitimate marital assets, but he had been ordered to pay me a settlement of $12 million for damages, plus a penalty of $8 million to the government for tax evasion. Robert was completely ruined. But apparently no one else knew. The wedding I had just seen on Facebook had easily cost $2 million. Charlotte's dress was from a European designer. The flowers had been imported from Holland. The music had been provided by a full symphony orchestra, and the guests had included the most prominent politicians and business people in the state. Where had Robert gotten that money? My phone started ringing immediately after my comment. It was my sister, Laura. "Victoria, what did you just do? Comment on a Facebook photo? Are you crazy? Everyone is going to see that comment." "That's exactly the point, Laura. What lawsuit?" What are you talking about? The lawsuit I won against Robert 6 months ago that left him broke. Robert doesn't have any money. Robert owes millions of dollars to the government, my lawyers, and me. That wedding they just celebrated was financed with money that isn't his. So how did he pay for it? That, dear sister, is exactly the question I want everyone to be asking. I hung up the phone and returned to Facebook. My comment already had 50 replies, and Robert had stopped responding. But Charlotte had appeared in the comments. Victoria, please don't ruin our special day with your resentment. I typed my second reply. It's not resentment, Charlotte. It's facts. Robert just married you with money that legally belongs to me. The war had officially begun. As I watched the comments multiply on the Facebook post, my mind automatically travelled back to 1998, when Robert and I got married in a ceremony that had been the envy of the whole city. He was 26 years old and I was 24. We were young, ambitious, and completely in love. Robert had just graduated with honours from his master's in business administration, and I had finished my accounting degree as the best in my generation. "We are going to conquer the world together," Robert had whispered to me on our wedding night, as we danced our first waltz as husband and wife in the ballroom of the city's most elegant hotel. "You and I are an unstoppable team." And for the first few years, we truly were. Robert had a brilliant business vision and a natural charisma that opened doors everywhere. I had the financial discipline and analytical precision that converted his creative ideas into profitable businesses. Together, we founded Miller and Associates, a business consulting firm that grew from a small rented office to a corporation with over 100 employees in less than 10 years. Charlotte had been there from the beginning. I had met her in college, where she was studying interior design, and she had been my maid of honor because she was the most loyal, funniest, and most supportive friend I had ever known. She was 3 years older than me, came from a more humble family, and had always admired the life Robert and I had built together. "You two are my example of a perfect marriage," Charlotte would tell me every time her own romantic relationships failed. "Someday, I want to have what you have." For 20 years, Charlotte had been practically part of our family. She had decorated our first house, then our second, bigger house, and finally the 5,000-square-foot mansion we had built in the city's most exclusive gated community. She had been the first person to hold my children when they were born, Richard Debus in the year 2000 and Patricia in the year 2003. She had been their godmother, had attended every birthday, every graduation, every important event in their lives. Family Sundays had been sacred at our house for 2 decades. Robert grilled steaks and chicken in the backyard. I prepared the side dishes, like mashed potatoes, mac and cheese, and green bean casserole. Charlotte brought desserts she bought at the city's most expensive bakery, and the children played in the pool while the adults talked about business, politics, and social gossip. "Aunt Charlotte," Patricia had said when she was 5 years old, "why don't you marry someone and come live with us forever?" "Because I already live with you forever, my love," Charlotte replied, holding my daughter. "I just sleep in my own house." Robert and I had been the golden couple of our social circle. He was the successful businessman who had started from nothing and built an empire. I was the intelligent and elegant wife who had been a full partner in that success. We appeared in local magazines, donated to prominent charities, organized fundraising events, and were honored guests at weddings, grand openings, and celebrations of all kinds. Our house had been the center of the local elite's social life. We organized 20-person dinner parties every month, New Year's Eve parties for 200 guests, and business meetings where the most important deals in the city were closed. Charlotte had always been my right hand in organizing these events, coordinating decorations, menus, and entertainment with the precision of a professional planner. "I don't know what I would do without you," I had told her countless times while planning an event. You're the sister I always wanted to have. And you are the family I always wanted to have, she always replied. The businesses had grown exponentially during the first decade of the new millennium. Robert had diversified into real estate, invested in technology, and expanded into other cities. By 2015, our net worth had exceeded $50 million, and we were considered one of the most prosperous families in the region. But now, reviewing those years with completely new eyes, I realized there had been signs I had chosen to ignore. Robert had started traveling more frequently for business around 2017. Trips that lasted 3 or 4 days, always to cities where he was supposedly exploring new investment opportunities. When I asked him for specific details about those trips, his answers were vague and general. Charlotte had also started traveling more around the same time. Creative inspiration trips to cities in the United States and Europe, where she was supposedly studying the latest interior design trends. When she returned, she had beautiful photos of architecture and decorations, but never seemed to have met people or had memorable experiences. Robert had started coming home late more often, explaining that he had been in extended meetings or important business dinners. When he arrived, he often smelled of perfume that wasn't mine, but when I asked him about it, he would say it was some female client or business partner who had gotten too close during social greetings. And the most obvious in retrospect, Charlotte had started making strange comments about my marriage. Victoria, doesn't it bother you that Robert works so much? She had asked me during one of our weekly lunches in 2018. No. Why would it bother me? His work is what allows us to live the way we live. But don't you miss having romantic time with him? Don't you miss being a priority in his life? Charlotte, we've been married for 20 years. Romance evolves. Does it evolve or does it disappear? At the time, I had interpreted her comments as concern from a single friend who didn't understand the dynamics of a mature marriage. Now I realized she had been assessing how vulnerable my marriage was to her interference. For 20 years, I had trusted 2 people more than anyone else in the world, my husband and my best friend. And for 5 years, those 2 people had been betraying me in the most intimate way possible. On February 15th, 2020, exactly 1 day after Valentine's Day, my perfect world crumbled in less than 5 minutes. Robert had come home late the night before, explaining he had had an extended business dinner and had arrived with a bouquet of roses that he had clearly bought at a gas station. That morning, he had left early for an important meeting, leaving his iPad forgotten on the breakfast table. When it lit up with a notification, I saw for the first time a message that would change my life forever. My love, last night was incredible. I can't wait to see you this afternoon at our special place. I love you more than words can express. C. The C was Charlotte. Our special place was the apartment Robert had supposedly bought as a real estate investment downtown. With trembling hands, I opened the Messages app and found a conversation that stretched back years. Thousands of messages between Robert and Charlotte, documenting a romantic relationship that had started in 2015 and had been intensifying into plans for a future together. I can't pretend I love Victoria anymore, Robert had written in a message in December of 2019. Every day I spend in that house is torture. I want to be with you. I want to marry you. I want to have the life we deserve. Me too, my love, Charlotte had replied. But we have to be smart. Victoria controls all the finances. If she suspects anything before we're prepared, she can financially ruin us. What do you suggest? Give her another 6 months to get used to the idea that her marriage is failing. Then you file for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. I'll play the supportive friend who stands by you during your difficult process. What if she realizes we've been together for years? She won't realize. Victoria sees what she wants to see. It's always been that way. I kept reading messages for 3 hours, feeling like every word was a direct stab to my heart. There were intimate photos they had exchanged, travel plans they had made together when I thought they were on separate business trips, and detailed discussions about how to handle our divorce so Robert could keep most of our assets. But what hurt the most were the messages where they mocked me. "Victoria made that awful dinner again," Robert had written. "I swear she pretends to be a good cook, but she has no idea what she's doing." "At least you don't have to pretend you like it," Charlotte had replied. "I have to eat her food every Sunday and act like it's delicious." "You know what bothers me most about her? She thinks she's indispensable to the business. She thinks that without her accounting skills, we couldn't function. Isn't that true? Charlotte, any competent accountant can do what Victoria does. She's convinced herself she's irreplaceable because it gives her a sense of control. And what are you going to do with the business when you divorce? I'm going to show her exactly how replaceable she is." I printed all the messages, all the photos, all the documents I found, then backed them up on 3 different devices and sent copies to my personal email account. At 2 in the afternoon, Charlotte arrived at my house for our weekly lunch, just as she had for years. "Hi, sister," she said, kissing me on the cheek as always. "How are you? You look a little tired." "I'm perfectly fine, Charlotte. In fact, I've never seen things more clearly." "What are you talking about?" I pulled out a folder full of the message printouts and put it on the dining room table. "I'm talking about this." Charlotte went completely pale in less than 5 seconds. "Victoria, I can explain." "Explain what exactly? Explain 5 years of sleeping with my husband? Explain 5 years of coming to my house every Sunday to pretend you were my best friend? Explain 5 years of planning how to steal my marriage and my money?" "Victoria, please, let me talk." "No, you've talked enough. For 5 years, in thousands of messages with my husband, where you planned my divorce and laughed at my cooking and my life. It wasn't like that, Victoria. The messages don't show the full context." "The full context? The full context is that you are a treacherous snake who destroyed 20 years of marriage and 30 years of friendship." Charlotte started crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic because she knew she had been discovered. "Victoria, please don't make this public. Think about your reputation. Think about your children. Now you worry about my reputation, after you two planned to destroy my life?" "We didn't plan to destroy your life, we just fell in love." "You fell in love while pretending to be my closest people. That's not love, Charlotte. That's calculated betrayal. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to divorce Robert, and I'm going to make sure that everyone knows exactly what kind of people you two are." "Victoria, please. Get out of my house. Get out of my house and out of my life." Charlotte left crying, but not before trying to take her purse where she had subtly put the folder with the printed messages. "Don't even think about it," I said, taking the folder from her. "This is just the first copy." That night, when Robert came home, I was waiting for him in the living room with all the evidence organized on the coffee table. "We need to talk," I said calmly. "Victoria, what is all this?" "It's the end of our marriage." The confrontation with Robert that night was exactly what I had expected. Desperate denials, followed by pathetic justifications, followed by defensive attacks against my character. But I had already spent the 8 hours since the discovery planning my strategy, and I was not going to let him manipulate me as he had been doing for 5 years. "Victoria, I know this looks bad, but it's not what you think," Robert had begun after quickly reviewing some of the printed messages. "Robert, I have 5 years of documented evidence of your affair with my best friend. There's no possible misinterpretation. The messages are taken out of context. Charlotte was going through a difficult time, and I was trying to help her as a friend. Help her as a friend by telling her you love her and planning to marry her. Victoria, you know our marriage has been in trouble for years. In trouble? For whom has it been in trouble? For me. I've been unhappy for a long time, but I didn't know how to tell you. So your solution was to have a 5-year affair with my best friend. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Robert, I have messages where you specifically plan how to handle our divorce so you can keep most of our assets. That doesn't just happen. Robert immediately changed strategy when he realized I had more evidence than he had expected. Victoria, let's be adults about this. We both know our marriage ended years ago. We can handle this civilly. Civilly? Like you and Charlotte have been handling things for 5 years. We can divide our assets fairly. You can keep the house. I'll keep the business. Everyone wins. Everyone wins. Robert, you just destroyed 20 years of marriage and 30 years of my most important friendship. No one is winning here except you and your new fiancé. Victoria, if you make this difficult, we are all going to lose. Are you threatening me? I'm telling you the reality. If this turns into an ugly legal battle, the only ones who will win are the lawyers. The next day, I hired Sarah Thompson, the most aggressive and successful divorce attorney in the city. Sarah had a reputation for destroying unfaithful husbands in legal battles, and she was exactly what I needed. Victoria, Sarah told me after reviewing all the evidence I had collected, this is one of the strongest cases of infidelity I have ever seen. With this evidence, we can get you a substantial settlement. Sarah, it's not just about the money. It's about justice. I understand perfectly, but I need you to understand that Robert is going to fight dirty. Men like him don't accept losing control without a fight. What kind of fight do you expect? He's going to try to hide assets. He's going to claim you knew about the affair and allowed it. He's going to try to portray you as a negligent or controlling wife. He's going to do everything possible to minimize his culpability. And can we win? With this evidence, we can not only win, we can destroy him. Robert had hired David Miller, no relation, but the most expensive divorce lawyer in the region. David had a reputation for protecting rich men from gold-digging wives and was known for his ruthless tactics. Robert's first move was exactly what Sarah had predicted, trying to hide money. Over the next few weeks, we discovered that Robert had been transferring large sums of money to offshore accounts. He had sold properties at ridiculously low prices to friends who would then sell them back to him after the divorce. And he had reported false losses in our businesses to make them seem less valuable than they really were. But Robert had made a fatal mistake. He had forgotten that I was the accountant who had managed our finances for 20 years. I knew every account, every investment, every property, every significant transaction we had made during our marriage. Sarah, I told her during our third meeting, Robert is committing tax fraud. What do you mean? He is reporting false losses to minimize the value of our assets in the divorce. But those same false losses mean he is evading taxes. Do you have evidence of that? I have 20 years of evidence of that. Victoria, are you saying Robert has been evading taxes for years? I am saying that Robert has been evading taxes, laundering money, and reporting false income for years, and I have complete documentation of everything. And you knew this during the marriage? I suspected some things, but Robert managed those aspects of the business. I focused on the legitimate accounting. Victoria, this changes everything. We can not only win the divorce, we can make Robert face criminal charges. Criminal charges? Tax fraud, tax evasion, money laundering. Robert could go to jail. And how does that affect our divorce? It means you won't just recover what's yours. You will get compensation for 20 years of being an unwilling accomplice in criminal activities. Over the following months, while Robert and David tried to fight the divorce using conventional tactics, Sarah and I were building a criminal case that was going to completely change the rules of the game. Robert thought he was fighting for half of our marital assets. In reality, he was about to lose everything, including his freedom. The trial began on September 15th, 2020, exactly 7 months after I had discovered the betrayal. Robert arrived at the courthouse dressed in his best suit, accompanied by David Miller, and with the confidence of a man who believed his political contacts and business reputation would protect him from any serious consequences. What Robert didn't know was that during those 7 months, Sarah and I had been working not only with divorce lawyers, but also with the Internal Revenue Service, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Your Honor, Sarah began during her opening statement, this is not a conventional divorce case. This is a case of marital, tax, and financial fraud that spans more than a decade. David Miller immediately tried to object. Your Honor, this is a divorce proceeding, not a criminal trial. Mr. Miller, the judge replied, when there is evidence of criminal activities that affect marital assets, this court has jurisdiction to consider it. Sarah first presented the evidence of infidelity. 5 years of messages between Robert and Charlotte, compromising photographs, records of trips together, and testimonies from people who had seen them in romantic situations. But then she presented something that left Robert completely pale. 20 years of financial records that documented systematic tax evasion. Your Honor, Sarah explained, while projecting documents onto the courtroom screen, Mr. Miller has been reporting false income for 2 decades. He has been hiding money in offshore accounts. He has been laundering money through shell companies, and he has been using marital properties to facilitate illegal financial activities. And did Mrs. Miller know about these activities? The judge asked. Mrs. Miller was responsible for the legitimate accounting of their companies. Mr. Miller separately managed the illegal activities specifically to keep her in the dark and protect himself legally. Robert whispered something urgent into David's ear, who immediately requested a recess. During the recess, I could see Robert talking frantically on the phone, probably trying to contact his accountants or his political contacts to help him get out of this situation. When we resumed, David completely changed the defense strategy. Your Honor, my client is willing to negotiate an out-of-court settlement that is favorable to both parties. What kind of settlement? The judge asked. He is willing to divide all marital assets equally and pay additional compensation to Mrs. Miller for the emotional distress caused by the infidelity. Sarah immediately stood up. Your Honor, we are not interested in negotiations. We want complete justice to be served. What are you specifically asking for? We are asking that all asset transfers Mr. Miller made over the last 2 years to hide money be reversed. We are asking for compensation for 20 years of criminal profits that were generated using marital assets, and we are asking that criminal charges be filed against Mr. Miller. Criminal charges? For what specific crimes? Tax fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and marital fraud. Robert looked increasingly desperate. During the second day of the trial, he tried to testify in his own defense. Your Honor, any irregularity in my tax reports was the result of bad advice from my accountants. I trusted professionals, and they failed me. Sarah destroyed him during the cross-examination. Mr. Miller, are you testifying under oath that you did not know that hiding money in Cayman Islands accounts was illegal? My accountants told me they were legitimate investments. Did your accountants also tell you that having a 5-year affair with your wife's best friend was a legitimate investment? That has nothing to do with finances. It doesn't? Because I have evidence that you used money from marital accounts to pay for hotels, trips, and gifts for your mistress for 5 years. Sarah presented receipts, bank statements, and credit card records that showed exactly how much marital money Robert had spent on his affair with Charlotte. Your Honour, Mr. Miller not only betrayed his wife emotionally, he robbed her financially to fund that betrayal. On the third day of the trial, we presented our star witness, the accountant who had been helping Robert with his tax evasion schemes for years and who had decided to cooperate with the authorities in exchange for immunity. Mr. Davis, Sarah asked him, can you describe the illegal financial activities you performed for Mr. Miller? For 12 years, I helped Mr. Miller hide income, create false losses, transfer money to offshore accounts, and establish shell companies to launder money. And did Mr. Miller know that these activities were illegal? Of course. He planned them specifically to avoid paying taxes and to hide assets from his wife. The accountant's testimony was devastating. Robert could no longer claim ignorance or bad professional advice. The verdict came after only 4 hours of deliberation. In the case of Miller versus Miller, the judge announced, this court finds that the defendant Robert Miller has committed marital, tax, and financial fraud. The following is ordered. First, all asset transfers made over the last 3 years are reversed. Second, Mrs. Victoria Miller receives 70% of all legitimate marital assets. Third, Mr. Robert Miller must pay a settlement of $12 million to Mrs. Miller for damages. Fourth, this case is remitted to the Attorney General to file criminal charges against Mr. Miller. Robert was completely ruined and faced the possibility of years in prison. But what he didn't know was that this was just the beginning of my revenge. 6 months after the trial verdict, I was living comfortably in my new house in Scottsdale, Arizona, with the $12 million in compensation, plus the majority of our marital assets, while Robert faced criminal charges that could send him to prison for 15 years. I had hired a private investigator named Michael Jones to monitor Robert's activities, specifically to ensure he was complying with court orders and wasn't hiding more assets. What Michael discovered surprised even me. Mrs. Miller, Michael reported during our monthly meeting, Robert is living in Charlotte's apartment and apparently has no regular income. How is he surviving? Charlotte is paying all his expenses. Her interior design business is apparently generating enough money to support both of them. But they are not living lavishly. Definitely not. They are living very modestly compared to their previous lifestyle. And what about the criminal charges? His lawyer is trying to negotiate a deal with the prosecution. It is possible he avoids jail time if he pays additional fines and makes full restitution. Over the following months, I had assumed Robert had learned his lesson and that he and Charlotte were quietly living with the consequences of their actions. I had begun to focus on rebuilding my own life. I had started a financial consulting business for divorced women. I had traveled through Europe for 2 months and had started dating a wonderful man named Edward. Then the wedding photos appeared on Facebook. $2 million for a single celebration for a man who supposedly had no money. I immediately called Michael. I need you to investigate where Robert got the money for that wedding. I'm on it, Michael replied. Something here doesn't add up. Michael worked for a week tracking the origin of the money. What he discovered was even more satisfying than I had expected. Mrs. Miller, Robert didn't pay for that wedding. What do you mean? Charlotte paid for it, but Charlotte didn't have the money either. So how did she pay for it? She took out a loan for $2 million using her business as collateral. Charlotte mortgaged her business to pay for Robert's wedding. Yes, but there's more. What more? The loan money came from the Central Business Bank, which is owned by Miller Investments. Miller Investments? The company you received as part of the divorce settlement. I was completely silent for several seconds, processing the perfect irony of the situation. Michael, are you telling me that Robert got married with money that indirectly came from my company? Exactly. Charlotte borrowed money from a bank that you control to pay for a wedding for the man who betrayed you. And does Robert know this? Apparently not. Charlotte handled all the financial transaction. Robert thought she had enough savings to pay for the wedding. And does Charlotte know that the money indirectly came from me? No, either. She just knows she got a loan from a bank. It was the most perfect revenge I could have imagined, and it had happened completely by accident. Robert had celebrated his true love with money that came from the woman he had betrayed. Charlotte had mortgaged her financial future to impress a man who was broke, and neither of them knew the truth. But after my Facebook comment, now everyone did. My phone didn't stop ringing for the next 24 hours. Mutual friends, family, work acquaintances, everyone wanted to know what I had meant by my comment. The wedding post had received over 1,000 comments, most of them asking about the lawsuit I had mentioned. Robert had stopped responding after my second comment, but Charlotte had continued trying to control the narrative. Victoria is resentful because Robert found happiness, Charlotte had written. She is trying to ruin our special day with lies. Then I published my final reply, a photo of the trial verdict ordering Robert to pay me $12 million, along with the bank statement showing that Charlotte's loan money had been approved by Miller Investments. For everyone asking about the lawsuit I mentioned, I wrote, here are the public documents. Robert owes me $12 million for marital fraud. Charlotte just mortgaged her business to pay for a $2 million wedding. The loan money came from a bank that I control. Robert got married with my money and he doesn't even know it. The comments immediately exploded. The post went viral within hours. Robert and Charlotte had turned their wedding into the biggest social scandal our city had seen in years. And I hadn't had to do anything except tell the truth. The call came at 11 at night, 3 days after my comment had gone viral on Facebook. It was Charlotte, crying hysterically. Victoria, I need to talk to you. Charlotte, we have nothing to talk about. Please, Victoria, it's about the loan money. What about the loan money? Robert lied to me. About everything? About what specifically? About the money? About his debts? About everything. Against my better judgment, but driven by curiosity, I agreed to meet Charlotte at a neutral coffee shop the next day. When I arrived, Charlotte looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, she wore no makeup, and her eyes were swollen from crying. Victoria, she said immediately when I sat down, Robert lied to me for years. About what? About the money? I thought he had savings, that he had investments, that the company was still worth something. Did he tell you that? He told me the lawsuit had been unfair, that you had exaggerated his financial problems, that he still had enough resources to support us. And you believed him. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because I had invested 5 years of my life in that relationship, and I couldn't accept that everything had been a lie. So when did you realize the truth? Yesterday, when I went to the bank to make the first payment on the loan I took out for the wedding. And what happened? The bank officer explained that Miller Investments had approved my loan, but that the president of Miller Investments wanted to personally review all the terms. And who is the president of Miller Investments? You, Victoria. You are the president. That's right. The officer told me that you had been informed of my loan application from the beginning, that you had personally approved lending me $2 million. And how did you react to that information? I realized that Robert had married me using money that came from you. I realized that I had mortgaged my business to finance a public humiliation. Did you tell Robert? I told him last night. We had the most terrible fight of our lives. What did he say? First, he denied knowing where the money came from. Then he blamed me for not having better investigated the sources of the loan. Then he told me it was your fault for making the comment on Facebook. He blamed you for the comment I made. He told me that if I had managed social media better, you would never have had the opportunity to publicly humiliate us. And what did you say? I told him that he had lied to me about his financial situation, that he had made me mortgage my business under false pretenses, and that I would never have agreed to pay for a $2 million wedding if I had known he was broke. How did he react? He told me that I knew what I was getting into when I decided to be with a married man. He told me that the financial consequences were my responsibility. He told you that. He told me that he had never promised me he would have money forever, and that if I had assumed things about his financial situation, that had been my decision. Charlotte, do you realize that Robert is manipulating you exactly like he manipulated me for years? I realize now. But Victoria, it's worse than that. Worse how? Robert is planning to divorce me. What? You've been married for a week. He told me that he had realized I wasn't the person he thought I was. He told me that my hysterical reaction about the money had shown him that I was materialistic and controlling. Hysterical reaction. You discovered he had lied to you about everything. That's what I told him. But Robert insists the problem is me, not him. So what is going to happen with the $2 million loan? That's the worst part. Robert says that since the loan is in my name, and my business is the collateral, it's my responsibility to pay it. He is not going to contribute anything. He says he doesn't have the money to contribute. He says that when he divorces me, he won't have any financial obligation to me because we will have been married for too short a time to justify spousal support. I remained silent for several minutes, processing the magnitude of the situation. Charlotte, do you realize what is happening here? What? Robert used you to finance a lavish wedding he couldn't afford. Now that he has the photos, the memories, and the public satisfaction of having married elegantly, he is going to abandon you with all the debt. That is exactly what is happening. And what are you going to do? I don't know, Victoria. My business doesn't generate enough money to pay a $2 million loan. If I can't make the payments, I'm going to lose everything. Everything. My business, my house, my 20 years of savings. Everything. Charlotte, do you finally understand what kind of man Robert is? I understand he is a monster. I understand he destroys everything he touches. And I understand I was stupid to believe I was different. Are you willing to testify against him? Testify about what? About the marital fraud he is committing against you? About how he lied to you to get you to finance his lifestyle? Would that help at all? Charlotte, Robert is repeating exactly the same pattern he used with me. If we can document it, we can prevent him from getting away with it again. And what about the loan? What about my business? That, Charlotte, is a different conversation. 2 weeks after my meeting with Charlotte, Robert had hired a new team of lawyers to launch a legal counter-offensive that surprised me with its aggression and desperation. Their objective was clear: to reverse the previous trial verdict and recover the assets he had lost using any available legal tactic. The first move came in the form of a defamation lawsuit, alleging that my Facebook comments had irreparably damaged his business and personal reputation. Your Honor, argued his new lawyer, a young and ambitious man named Alex Rodriguez, Mrs. Miller used private divorce information to publicly humiliate my client on social media, causing substantial economic and emotional damage. Sarah responded with documents that showed all the information I had shared on Facebook was part of the public court record. Your Honor, Mrs. Miller simply shared facts that were already in the public domain. There is no possible defamations when documented truths are told. The second move was an appeal of the original verdict, alleging that it had been influenced by irrelevant evidence about Robert's financial activities. The previous court allowed tax issues to contaminate what should have been a straightforward divorce proceeding, Alex argued. Sarah had anticipated this strategy and had a devastating response prepared. Additional evidence of fraud that had not been presented in the original trial. Your Honour, since the previous verdict, we have discovered additional evidence that Mr. Miller has continued to evade taxes and hide assets, even after court orders. The third move was the most desperate. Robert alleged that I had been involved in his illegal financial activities, and that therefore I could not claim ignorance or victim status. Mrs. Miller was a professional accountant and partner in all the companies where irregularities were committed, Alex argued. It is impossible that she didn't know what was happening. This accusation infuriated me more than all the others, because I knew it was false, and because I knew Robert was making it specifically to damage my professional reputation. Your Honour, Sarah responded, Mr. Miller is trying to hold my client responsible for crimes he deliberately committed without her knowledge. We have evidence that he specifically structured his illegal activities to keep Mrs. Miller ignorant of them. But the most surprising move came when Robert filed a separate lawsuit alleging that my company, Miller Investments, had engaged in predatory practices by approving Charlotte's loan. Your Honour, Alex argued, Mrs. Miller deliberately approved a loan she knew Mrs. Davis could not repay, with the specific purpose of humiliating my client. Sarah had warned me that this lawsuit was the most dangerous because it had a certain legal basis. Victoria, technically Robert is right that your company approved a loan to Charlotte, knowing she probably couldn't repay it. Is that illegal? Not necessarily illegal, but it could be considered a dishonest business practice. How serious is this? If Robert can prove you approved the loan with malicious intent, you could face regulatory fines and damage to your business reputation. And how do we defend against that? By demonstrating that the loan was approved using standard commercial criteria, and that any knowledge about the personal relationship between Robert and Charlotte did not influence the credit decision. Over the following weeks, as lawyers from both sides presented arguments and counter-arguments, something interesting began to emerge. Robert was making the same mistakes he had made during our divorce. He was lying under oath about his finances, he was hiding evidence, and he was trying to manipulate the legal system to avoid the consequences of his actions. But this time, I was prepared for every move he made. Michael, my private investigator, had been continuously monitoring Robert since the original trial. He had photographic evidence of Robert living a lifestyle that was inconsistent with his court declarations of poverty. Mrs. Miller, Michael reported, Robert has been frequenting expensive restaurants, buying designer clothes, and traveling first class. He has money hidden somewhere. Do you have any idea where? I'm working on that. But I have evidence that he is receiving money from sources he has not declared to the court. What kind of sources? I believe Charlotte is giving him money, even after they supposedly separated. Charlotte is giving Robert money. I have photos of them meeting in coffee shops. I have records of bank transfers from Charlotte's accounts to accounts Robert controls. And I have evidence that they are living together again. Are they living together? Charlotte never moved out of her apartment when they separated. Robert is still living there. So the whole separation was an act. It seems so. I think they planned the fake separation to generate sympathy for Charlotte, in case she decided to testify against Robert. Michael's information completely changed our legal strategy. Sarah, I said, Robert and Charlotte are working together to defraud the legal system. How? They are pretending to be separated while continuing to live together and share financial resources. Robert is claiming poverty in court, while Charlotte financially supports him. Victoria, if we can prove that, we don't just win these new lawsuits. We can get Robert arrested for contempt of court and perjury. And what about Charlotte? Charlotte would also face charges for conspiracy to commit judicial fraud. even if she testifies about how Robert manipulated her, if she is voluntarily participating in defrauding the court, her testimony about being Robert's victim becomes irrelevant. For the first time since this legal battle had begun, I had Robert exactly where I wanted him, caught in lies so complex that he wouldn't be able to get out of them without admitting guilt to multiple crimes. The decisive moment came during a routine hearing on March 15th, 2021, exactly 1 year after I had discovered the original betrayal. Robert had arrived at the courthouse with his new lawyer, prepared to continue his arguments about my supposed predatory business practices, unaware that Michael had spent the previous night installing surveillance cameras outside Charlotte's apartment. "Your Honor," Sarah began. "Before continuing with Mr. Miller's arguments, we have new evidence that is relevant to all pending cases." "What kind of evidence?" the judge asked. "Evidence that Mr. Miller has been systematically committing perjury during these proceedings." Alex Rodriguez immediately stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a distraction tactic." "Your Honor," Sarah continued, "I have video of Mr. Miller entering and exiting Mrs. Davis's apartment on multiple occasions over the past few weeks, despite his sworn statements that he is no longer in a relationship with her." The judge asked to see the evidence immediately. On the courtroom screen, video appeared of Robert arriving at Charlotte's apartment on Sunday night, leaving Monday morning, returning Tuesday, and repeating this pattern for 2 full weeks. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, "I have financial evidence that Mrs. Davis has been transferring money to accounts controlled by Mr. Miller, despite his declarations that he has no economic resources." Robert looked increasingly pale as Sarah presented bank statements, photographs of electronic transfers, and expenditure records that showed Robert had been living a lifestyle that was impossible without hidden income. "Your Honor," Alex said desperately, "my client can explain these discrepancies." "I hope he can," the judge replied dryly. "Mr. Miller, approach the stand." Robert walked slowly toward the stand, clearly looking for time to invent a plausible explanation. "Mr. Miller," the judge asked him, "have you been living with Mrs. Davis for the past few weeks?" "Your Honor, Mrs. Davis and I have been gradually reconciling." "And why did you not inform the court about this reconciliation?" Because it was a private process that we didn't think was relevant to the legal proceedings." "Mr. Miller, you alleged under oath that you had no relationship with Mrs. Davis and that you had no access to financial resources. Were you lying?" "I wasn't exactly lying, Your Honor. The situation was complicated." Sarah stood up to cross-examine. "Mr. Miller, is it true that Mrs. Davis has been giving you money over the past few weeks?" "She has helped me with some basic expenses." "How much money specifically?" "I don't keep an exact count." "Mr. Miller, I have bank records showing that Mrs. Davis has transferred $180,000 to you over the past 2 months. Is that correct?" "Possibly. And where did this money come from?" "From Charlotte's personal savings." "The personal savings that she had to use as collateral for the $2 million loan she needed to pay for your wedding?" That's different." "How is it different? Does Mrs. Davis have enough savings to support you financially, or does she not have them?" "Your Honor," Alex intervened, "my client is being confused by complex questions." "They are not complex questions," the judge replied. "They are questions about whether your client has been telling the truth under oath." Sarah continued. "Mr. Miller, where do you believe Mrs. Davis is getting the money to support you?" "From her interior design business." "Her business that she mortgaged to pay for your wedding?" "Yes." "Mr. Miller, are you aware that Mrs. Davis has been taking out additional loans to be able to give you money?" Robert remained completely silent. "Are you aware that Mrs. Davis is now in debt for more than $3 million, largely to finance your lifestyle?" I didn't know that specific figure. But did you know she was borrowing money to give it to you? That was her decision. Her decision after you asked her for money? I didn't exactly ask her for money. Then how did it end up in your bank account? She offered to help me during my difficult situation. Your difficult situation of facing the legal consequences of 20 years of tax fraud. Objection, Alex shouted. Denied, the judge replied. Answer the question, Mr. Miller. Yes, I suppose. At that moment, Sarah played her final card. Your Honor, I also have evidence that Mr. Miller has been manipulating Mrs. Davis to commit perjury in these proceedings. What kind of evidence? Audio recordings of conversations between Mr. Miller and Mrs. Davis, where he specifically instructs her on what to say in court to protect him from the consequences of his lies. The recordings Michael had obtained using professional surveillance equipment were devastating. Robert instructed Charlotte on how to lie about their finances, how to pretend they were separated, and how to present false testimonies about my supposed predatory business practices. Charlotte, you have to say that Victoria approved the loan specifically to humiliate me, Robert was heard saying in one of the recordings. You have to act like she was vengeful and malicious. But that's not true, Robert. It doesn't matter if it's true. It matters if we can convince the judge that it's true. And what if they ask me about our money? You say you haven't given me anything. You say we've been completely separated since you discovered the truth about the wedding. But what if they have evidence of the bank transfers? You say those transfers were to pay off debts I had with you from before the marriage. The judge had heard enough. Mr. Miller is arrested for contempt of court, perjury, and conspiracy to commit judicial fraud. Robert was handcuffed in the courtroom and taken directly to jail. Charlotte, who had been sitting in the public gallery, ran toward Sarah after the hearing. Please, she begged. I didn't know this was illegal. Robert told me it was normal to exaggerate some things in court. Mrs. Davis, Sarah replied, you are also going to face charges. But if you are willing to fully cooperate and testify honestly about all of Robert's activities, we can negotiate a deal. What kind of deal? Immunity in exchange for full and honest testimony? Charlotte immediately accepted. And that is how Robert finally faced the full consequences of 20 years of lies, fraud, and manipulation. 18 months after Robert's arrest in court, I was sitting on the terrace of my new house in Scottsdale, watching the sunset while Edward prepared margaritas in the kitchen. Robert had been sentenced to 12 years in prison for tax fraud, money laundering, perjury, and conspiracy. Charlotte had complied with her cooperation agreement and had received 2 years of probation, but she had lost her business, her house, and all her reputation in our city. My phone vibrated with a Facebook notification. It was a private message from Robert from jail, sent through another inmate's account. Victoria, I need to talk to you. There are things you need to know about Charlotte and about the money. Not everything is what it seems. I deleted the message without replying. After 2 years of legal battles, lies, and manipulations, I had finally learned that some conversations simply weren't worth having. Edward appeared on the terrace with 2 perfect margaritas and sat next to me on the swing we had installed the previous week. Everything okay? He asked, noticing I had been checking my phone. Everything's perfect, I replied, putting away the phone and taking his hand. Robert tried to contact me again. And I realized I have no interest in hearing more lies from him. Edward smiled and kissed me softly. I like this version of you, this Victoria who doesn't accept manipulation. It's the Victoria I should have been for 20 years. Do you regret anything? I regret having been so naive for so long, but I don't regret fighting for justice when I finally understood what was happening. Over the past 18 months, I had completely rebuilt my life. My financial consulting business for divorced women had grown to have more than 50 clients. I had sold the house where Robert and I had lived for 20 years and had bought this dream property in Scottsdale. I had started a relationship with Edward, a 60-year-old divorced doctor who was exactly the opposite of Robert: honest, direct, and completely transparent about his finances, his emotions, and his intentions. My children, Richard and Patricia, had been incredibly supportive throughout the entire process. At first, they had been confused about the breakup of our marriage, but when they understood the magnitude of their father's lies, they had cut contact with him completely. "Mum," Patricia had told me during one of our weekly family dinners, "I'm so proud to see how you handled all this." Why? Because you didn't let yourself be a victim. You fought for what was right. Sometimes I feel like I was too vengeful. "Mum, revenge would have been doing something bad to Dad. Justice is having used the legal system to make him face the consequences of his crimes. What's the difference?" "The difference is that you told the truth and let the system decide what to do with that truth. Dad lied and tried to manipulate the system." Richard had added, "Besides, Mum, you protected other women from Dad scamming them in the future. That's not revenge, that's social protection." The previous week, I had received a package in the mail from Charlotte. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a letter. "Victoria, I know this doesn't make up for even a fraction of the damage I did to you, but it's all I can afford right now. I lost everything by believing Robert's lies, but more importantly, I lost the best friend I ever had by betraying you in the most horrible way possible. I don't expect forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. I just hope you know that I realize I was a terrible person and that I am trying to be better. The money comes from the sale of the jewelry Robert had given me during our years together. I thought it was appropriate for it to go back to you somehow. I wish you all the happiness in the world with Edward. He seems to be the man you always deserved. Charlotte." I had deposited the check into an account I had opened for donations to shelters for women victims of domestic violence. It was the most appropriate way to use money that had come from a toxic relationship. "You know what the most ironic thing about this whole situation is?" I asked Edward as we watched the sun set. "What?" "That Robert and Charlotte thought they were destroying me when they left together, but in reality, they set me free." "How?" "They set me free from a marriage that had become a lie, from a friendship that was false, and from a life where I didn't really know who I was." "And who are you, really?" "I am a 62-year-old woman who finally knows her worth. I am a successful businesswoman who helps other women regain their financial independence. I am a mother of 2 wonderful adults who respect me, and I am the fiancée of a man who loves me for who I really am, not for what I can give him. And does that make you happy?" "It makes me happier than I ever was during 20 years of a perfect marriage." That night, as Edward and I ate dinner in our dining room overlooking the mountains, I thought about all the women who had come through my office over the past few months. Women who had discovered infidelity. Women who had been financially scammed by their husbands. Women who had spent decades not knowing how much they were really worth. Revenge, I always told my clients, is living well. It is rebuilding your life so that it is better than the life that was stolen from you. Robert was in a 10-foot by 10-foot cell, eating institutional food and sleeping on a bed he shared with a cellmate who probably snored. I was in a 2,000-square-foot house, eating gourmet food prepared by the man I loved, and sleeping in a king-size bed with a view of gardens I had personally designed. That was all the revenge I needed.